Fellas, today we're going to be talking about the kryptonite of every UFC champion. Now, what I mean by kryptonite is the one thing. Now, this can be a person or a certain style or just anything in their career that is the one thing that kind of is their enemy. One thing that makes them worse as a champion. One thing that is absolutely a nightmare to them. Now, this can be a reoccurring theme, like I said. It can be a particular fighter, it can be a certain style, but every single UFC champion right now, for me, some were harder than others, but a lot of them have a kryptonite. So we're going to be going over every kryptonite of every UFC champion. Let me know if you agree, or if, maybe I should have picked a better option. But either way, we're going in there with the heavyweight division, and the champion is Jon Jones. Now, Jon Jones' kryptonite, it's his personal life. Jon Jones would undoubtedly be the GOAT. We're going to talk about steroids first. He would undoubtedly be the GOAT if it wasn't for steroids. That you can't justify him not being the greatest of all time if it wasn't for steroids. That's the only thing anyone can have over Jon Jones not being the GOAT, is the fact that he took steroids. And the fact that he didn't just do it once, he did it on multiple occasions. He's had to pull out of fights due to steroids. The fact that he's still allowed... To be fair, he's been treated very nicely by the UFC. TJ Dillashaw and other guys who have taken steroids, their careers have gone down the drain. But Jon Jones, he's had a lot of opportunities, but steroids is the one thing that has always haunted his career. This guy could go on to get like 20 more defenses, and people would still bring up the fact that he can't be the greatest of all time because of the steroids. And there's other things outside of his the steroids, like, the whole domestic violence thing, where he's been getting cut from the UFC. Only last year, not cut from the UFC, but you know what I mean, like... he's had to take time off. Even, was it last year when he headbutted that cop's car? The guy's just not right in the head. Taking drugs, injuries as well. I know this is every fight he gets injured, so I'm not just going to say that's his kryptonite, but his personal life in general, the hit and run incident with a pregnant woman. There's just a lot of things this guy does that keeps him out, puts him in trouble when he's outside the octagon. Those 3 years from 2020 to 2023, so many things went on, including Jon Jones. His personal life, if this guy had a clean personal life like GSP, he would genuinely, undoubtedly be the greatest of all time, because there's nothing you can bring up for the fact that he's not the greatest of all time. Steroids has been taken. There's just a lot of things he's doing that shortened his MMA career. He's had to be suspended on multiple occasions. Potentially, he could have got a lot more defenses. His prime could have lasted longer. Not that his career is necessarily bad now, because he is, in my eyes, at least the greatest of all time. Maybe you've got different opinions because of the steroids, which is in his personal life, but... overall, Jon Jones and his personal life don't really go hand in hand, and that's the one kryptonite of Jon Jones. No fighter is his kryptonite, it's him himself. Jon Jones is the biggest enemy to Jon Jones. Light heavyweight and Alex Pereira. His biggest kryptonite, I'm going to say it's heavy grappling. Now, is he undefeated in the UFC besides the one time he got knocked out? Yes, so that would suggest that he can take grappling, but... He still gets out-grappled pretty regularly. I'm going to go back to the Adesanya fight, the first fight. He was out-grappled. I forgot which round it was. I think it might have been 3 or 4. But he was out-grappled by Adesanya pretty easily. And I understand that was only one of his first few MMA fights. And he hasn't been doing MMA for a long time, so I'm not here to say that he's a bad fighter and it's his fault. But that just is his kryptonite. Even the fight with Jan Blachowicz. If that wasn't in Salt Lake City, there's an argument that you can bring up. And I know I don't want to do ifs and buts, but... if it wasn't in Salt Lake City, there's an argument you could make that Jan Blachowicz could have won that fight. But yeah, Jan Blachowicz took him down and dominated him pretty easily on the ground. Nearly got a submission in the first round as well. Yuri Prohaska as well was able to do it. And I'm scared that if this guy goes against a guy like Ankalaev, he's just going to get absolutely mauled when it comes to grappling, because his grappling's definitely his biggest weakness. He has improved it. I'm not going to sit here and lie. He has improved it. He nearly got a submission over Yuri Prohaska, the standing guillotine. I think he got a standing guillotine over Jan Blachowicz as well. So he's definitely improved his grappling after working with Glover Teixeira, but heavy grappling is still his biggest weakness. Maybe he's too much of a defensive kickboxing now, because I've noticed that I feel like he's started to slow down when it comes to kickboxing. I don't think he's as big as a threat as he was at middleweight. Now, the reason I think that is because I don't think he looks at Adesanya and thinks that Adesanya's going to take him down, so he can fully focus on striking. Whereas at light heavyweight, he's always going to have someone taking him down in the back of his head. So maybe he's a little bit, I don't know, maybe a little bit, what's the word? Like, he doesn't really want to engage as much. He doesn't want to risk striking with them too much because of the threat of the takedown. But I feel like heavy grappling, Ankalaev is this guy's nightmare matchup. And if Ankalaev can get past Johnny Walker, he's probably going to get a title shot. after Jamal Hill. And if Alex Pereira is still the champion and he's still fighting, Ankalaev's a nightmare matchup. But heavy grappling is the one thing that Pereira wants to avoid. And I heard Jamal Hill say that he's not going to grapple with Alex Pereira. If I was Jamal Hill, I'd be wanting to do everything to grapple with this guy, because that's your best chance at winning. I know he can also knock him out, but why not try and grapple him? It's his biggest weakness. Middleweight and Sean Strickland. This was a really, really hard option because Sean Strickland doesn't have necessarily an obvious kryptonite for me. It's not a particular fighter. I've just gone with heavy hitters. The reason I say hard hitters is because there's a theme of him kind of losing to hard hitters in the UFC. He got beaten up by Kamaru Usman. Now, yes, that was in 2017. That was 6 years ago, but I mean, it still happened, and Usman was a hard hitter at the time, beating him up in grappling and on the feet. He got knocked out cold by Alex Pereira last year. Just after that, he got beaten by Cannonier, who's another hard hitter. I know that was a very close fight. Some people can make the argument that Sean Strickland actually won the fight. And I'm saying he's probably going to lose to Dricus du Plessis as well. I'm pretty confident he's going to lose to Dricus, but at the same time, I was pretty confident he was going to lose to Adesanya, and he didn't. But I feel like hard hitters, a real hard hitter, someone that can hit hard, potentially maybe guys who are meant to be at light heavyweight but are just cutting their body weight off to stay at middleweight, like Pereira and maybe even Dricus, is Sean Strickland's kryptonite. We haven't seen the Dricus fight yet, so I'm not going to include that, but I feel like a hard hitter is this guy's worst nightmare. I feel like he's more willing to engage with people who don't necessarily hit as hard, like Adesanya, like Abbas Magomedov, like a couple of the other guys he's faced. But when it comes to a real hard hitter, not only is he more kind of less willing to engage, but at the same time, sometimes it can sleep him, like we saw with Pereira. But yeah, hard hitters I'm going to say for Sean Strickland, because there isn't necessarily an obvious one for Strickland. So I'm going to say hard hitters is the one kind of kryptonite for Sean Strickland, and maybe he's going to get slept by Dricus, maybe not. Leon Edwards. I've gone with pressure. I feel like whenever Leon Edwards goes against massive amounts of pressure in fights, he starts to develop a bit of a defensive mindset. I spelled defensive wrong there, ignore that. But no, he kind of builds up a defensive mindset. We saw it in the Kamaru Usman 2 fight. That first round, Leon Edwards was doing great. Even tripped Kamaru Usman. First guy to take him down. Was doing pretty good on the feet. And I'd say 10-9 Leon Edwards that first round. But the second he started to feel pressure from Kamaru Usman, he just let it take over him. Then round 3, 4, 2, 3, 4... even pretty much all of 5, he was getting out-grappled and dominated, obviously, until the iconic head kick knockout. But pressure is the one thing that Leon Edwards doesn't tend to do well against. Nate Diaz would have beaten this guy. I can almost guarantee that Nate Diaz would have finished him had he put pressure on him in round 5. When Nate Diaz rocked Leon Edwards, if he didn't just point at him and he actually went to go for the finish, that would have been crazy, Nate Diaz beating Leon Edwards, but he could have done it, and Leon Edwards doesn't necessarily do well against pressure, and this is why I think Colby could capitalise on it, because Colby's a high pressure grappler. He's got insane cardio, and the fact that Leon Edwards doesn't necessarily do well against pressure, this could be a nightmare matchup for Leon Edwards, man. So I'm going to go with pressure. Yeah, he just because sometimes he kind of like evolves a defensive mindset. Sometimes he's focused on what the other opponent's going to do rather than what he's going to do. So I'm going to say pressure for Leon Edwards. Very complete fighter, but sometimes a fighter can get in his head if you just put that little bit more pressure on Leon Edwards than he's used to. Lightweight and Islam Makhachev, it's got to be Adriano Martins. Now, Islam Makhachev doesn't necessarily have like a flaw. There's not a certain style matchup that he doesn't do well against. There's not a certain lifestyle he's got that he does bad. There's only one certain fighter that he's always going to be haunted by, and that's Adriano Martins. Adriano Martins isn't a big name. No one's going to remember this guy. The only reason people are going to remember this guy is for knocking out Islam Makhachev. And unfortunately for Islam, that's going to haunt his legacy forever. The casuals are going to say Islam Makhachev can't be above Khabib because Khabib's undefeated. And obviously that's a terrible argument, but you know what the casuals are like. This guy could have been 25-0 right now. This guy could end on an undefeated streak. The fact that he's only lost in the UFC is to a knockout against a guy that no one knows. He's always going to haunt him. He dominates everyone, dominates Volkanovski, Oliveira, the rest of the lightweight division. And the fact that his once flawless career is no longer flawless because of one knockout, which was years ago, people are always going to bring it up. Does this mean he can't enter the GOAT conversation? Obviously not. GSP got knocked out, so what? But this absolute no one in Adriano Martins knocking out Islam Makhachev, he's always going to haunt Islam. And the fact that he couldn't have a flawless career, because he's an insane fighter, and I can't really think of anyone in the UFC right now that's going to beat this guy. And the fact that it had to be against Adriano Martins, just to put him that one level down some of the other fighters, like Khabib, on the record-wise. I'm going to go Adriano Martins for Islam Makhachev, but the Kryptonite of Volkanovski is Islam Makhachev himself. Yeah, Volkanovski again, similar to Islam and Martins. Volkanovski, Islam is the only guy he hasn't able to be beat in the UFC. He's cleared out the featherweight division, destroyed Ortega, Holloway, Korean Zombie, Yair Rodriguez, beat people like Jose Aldo as well. The one guy that he hasn't been able to beat and dominate is Islam Makhachev. That is his kryptonite. There's an argument you can make that if Volkanovski would have moved up to 155 when Oliveira was champion, maybe Alexander Volkanovski would have won that matchup, because in my opinion, Oliveira is a much easier matchup for Volkanovski than Islam is. But it's the only guy to make Volk look beatable. If Volk never moved to 155 and challenged Islam, would he be much higher on the GOAT list? Would people have said? And then again, you can also make the theory that, Volkanovski would have beaten Islam if he moved up. And obviously, I know he has moved up, but if Volkanovski never moved up, there'll be a lot of theories saying that he would have beaten Islam. And this guy could have retired on much more of a high. Arguably the greatest feather. I mean, obviously, it's not going to take away from his featherweight career, the fact that he got knocked out by Islam Makhachev, but it stopped him from becoming double champ. It's always going to rain on his career now. Whenever he gets wins over these top contenders, the Islam fans are always going to rain his comment section, saying that he got knocked out by Islam. And Islam Makhachev, the only guy he hasn't been able to one-up and the only guy he hasn't been able to beat. So I'm going to go Islam Makhachev for Volkanovski. Bantamweight, Sean O'Malley. I've gone with his cursed matches. Every now and then, after a couple of wins, Sean O'Malley will tend to get cursed matches. The first one was the no contest injury loss against... No, that was the second one. The first one was the injury loss against Marlon Vera. Now, this is his only loss in his UFC career, and I'm pretty sure it's his MMA career as well. And you can say what you want, but it was an injury loss. Sean O'Malley got injured, ended up getting finished by Marlon Vera after he capitalized on the injury. Something to do with a leg injury or a nerve injury. But that was his only injury loss, or only loss in his career against Marlon Vera. That was the first cursed matchup. Then he goes against Pedro Munoz, which would have been like a number one after the Pedro Munoz fight. It would have got a number one contender fight. And the UFC treated that like a win for O'Malley, because then they ended up giving him a PTN matchup, which... maybe Pedro Munoz should have got that matchup instead. I'm not saying he did. I don't think either of them should have deserved the big matchup, because neither of them won. But he got a no contest injury against Pedro Munoz by poking his eye. Then he fights PTN literally the next fight, gets a very, very controversial decision. A lot of MMA fans seem to think that PTN won that fight. It was a very, very close decision, and it was a very, very controversial decision. People think he didn't win. So I'm going to go cursed matches for Sean O'Malley, and I genuinely don't think that's going to be the last. I can just see Sean O'Malley getting injured. Imagine he gets injured in the same way against Marlon Vera a second time. This guy just has cursed matchups. He doesn't necessarily go bad against a certain style. He doesn't necessarily look bad against certain fighters. There's not one fighter that kind of, reigns over this guy, but one bad thing about O'Malley is definitely his cursed matches. The amount of cursed matches this guy's having is insane. You can also use this argument for PTN as well. The disqualification loss against Aljamain Sterling, then two back-to-back very, very close to controversial losses. So that's when I'm going to go for Sean O'Malley. And finally, Pantoja. Again, this was another hard one to pick, because Pantoja doesn't necessarily have like an open floor. But I've gone with people who we can't break with grappling. I feel like Pantoja starts to slow down when he can't necessarily break them or dominate them with grappling. Even the recent fight with Brandon Moreno, now, that was a controversial fight, but I genuinely do think Pantoja won the fight. I really do think Pantoja beat Moreno. But it was a close fight, and the reason it was a close fight is because Pantoja wasn't able to beat him with submissions. Moreno's an underrated grappler, but Pantoja just wasn't able to beat him with his grappling and dominate him with his grappling. It was a stand-up fight for a majority of the fight, besides the few times that Pantoja was clinging onto him. The Figueiredo loss as well. Figueiredo's an amazing grappler that Pantoja couldn't beat and ended up, not being able to win that fight. Lost to Askar Askarov as well. There was a little bit of grappling in that fight. Again, Pantoja couldn't dominate him with his grappling, and Askar ended up winning the fight. And I feel like just overall, if Pantoja can't dominate an opponent with his grappling, if he can't bully them, whether he just can't get a submission or he can't, absolutely dominate them with grappling, I feel like he does tend to slow down, and he does tend to have a much closer fight than what he would have had. So that's one thing I'm going to say about Pantoja. But overall, he's still an amazing grappler. And that for me is the kryptonite of every UFC champion. Let me know if you agree. Let me know your thoughts on this. But yeah, thank you for watching.